Freedom Council is nothing without all of you. How do we go about getting people held criminally responsible for their acts? The military is still at risk. Election interference, the medicalization of childhood. These drug dealers like Pfizer and Moderna, we can seize their property. We develop our litigation through conferences like this. It's going to come through communications. It's going to come through conversations. And Freedom Council is that conversation.
For information, visit freedomcouncil.org.
Many doctors are actually working in employed positions, and they were told, if you use these drugs, you probably will be fired.
This is something that could have ended the pandemic if people had understood it, and instead it's being suppressed.
And such a violation, I have to stress, has never occurred before for any medication ever.
The federal government is incentivizing hospitals to prescribe a medication which is toxic.
This is a study designed by the World Health Organization that is not only designed to fail, it's designed to kill.
Guess what they did? They gave her a 5-day cycle, and my mom is dead.
Is this about money? Because if it's about money, then it's disgusting that we killed a person for the price of a stock.
Academic medicine is committing a fraud, is committing, I think, a crime against humanity.
And if you ask me, this isn't a hospital, this is a concentration camp.
I've interviewed doctors, nurses, vaccine-injured, malpractice survivors, and even interacted with heads of the FDA. And my work has been repeatedly censored. What I've found is an unholy alliance of public, private, and political groups that seem hell-bent on turning all of us into lab rats.
There's something that has gone wrong here.
History is unforgiving. It will become very clear very soon who was on the right side of history, who was on the wrong side of history.
My name is John, and I am a storyteller. And this is kind of my story.
I knew as early as February 2020 that I needed to do something.
I recognized that there was a systematic problem and that this was not about hydroxychloroquine, it was something larger.
Fear shut the world down and people made a lot of money at it as they were killing us.
I was asked to speak at a freedom rally that was set up to discredit my reputation.
Whoever orchestrated this must not have the safety of this nation in mind.
Medicine and politics should be separated. These doctors were handcuffed.
The American public has awakened. We have a new civil rights movement to restore our rights, and we're going to hold them accountable.
It is a natural progression of a man of God or woman of character to see injustice, to seek it out, and then to act upon it.
Do you hear me? We will never lock down again This is the hill we die on.
Don't miss New American Heroes with attorney Warner Mendenhall and John Davidson, Mondays on BrokenTruth.tv. Presented by Freedom Council. Join today at freedomcouncil.org.
I didn't recommend locking anything down. I recommended to the president that we shut the country down. First of all, I didn't recommend locking anything down.
I didn't recommend locking anything down. I didn't recommend locking anything down.
I didn't recommend locking anything down. I recommended to the president that we shut the country down.
With Broken Truth, I guess we're calling it New American Heroes. Hey, Warner, how you doing?
Hey, I'm really good. How are you?
I'm good, man. This is the first of our new kind of series, right?
Well, yes. In fact, we were on the phone today with a bunch of the attorneys. As you know, Freedom Council has hundreds and hundreds of stories of people who fought back.
Yeah.
And, I think the attorneys are interested in having some of that play out and get known by the public.
Sure.
We've certainly had a tremendous amount of success within the group in general on the employment cases, although there is an exception, which happens to be, and maybe we'll address this a little bit with Dr. Moore, but the healthcare workers. I mean, we still have real problems with those cases, the employment cases, where the nurses and doctors are getting fired, their licenses are getting challenged. So a lot of ongoing issues to deal with coming up.
Yeah, well, nobody's here to see me, so I'll skip my preamble. But let's get Dr. Kirk Moore in here. Maybe what I want to do is show. Do you remember the video of Dr. Moore on the front of steps of the courthouse last week?
Yes.
That's kind of a great lead-in. If you guys don't mind, I'd like to play that first, just to give the viewer a remember. Just to know this is where we were just a few days ago. So here you go.
You go in here. What are your thoughts about right now that you're seeing all this?
Just seeing people I haven't seen in years come over and stand with us and support. It's unbelievable.
So when you, this is why you did it, right? Because you love the people you are here.
I did what was right. I didn't have anybody in mind except for just doing what was right. So it wasn't for me, it wasn't for Elena, it wasn't for the kids, it wasn't for anybody, it was just doing what's right.
Awesome. God bless. We're with you. It's going to happen. It's going to happen.
We believe it. I'm not seeing for next week. Oh, you do? That's right. Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, that's powerful. Let's get Dr. Moore in here.
All right.
Hi, Dr. Moore. How are you, sir?
Hey, man, that's not fair.
I know. I just sabotaged you.
I mean, the only thing that would have been worse is to show that clip of my son making that speech.
Yeah.
Yeah. But all right. Thank you.
And honestly, your son, I did see that. I mean, yeah, I'm sure you couldn't be prouder of him.
Oh. Yeah. he wouldn't let me see the speech the night before.
Yeah.
You just do what's right, man. You teach your kids to do what's right, and teach them good morals, good values. You take care of their room, keep it clean, pick up after themselves, put their dishes away. Just little things I think add up over the course of time. My kids been doing their own laundry since they were 6, 7 years old. You just kind of like teach them life skills. But my son, because of what's happened prior to all this, and then what's happened all through COVID and everything else, has a resilient soul that is, just is really hard to come by.
Yeah. Well, I just, I want to just thank you. I mean, who knew that doing the right thing would be so hard? And it shouldn't be hard in this country to do the right thing, but it really, really is. It's become overwhelming for so many people. And I'm going to even include, I have a very broad view of this. So those of us who refused to take the shot and defended those who didn't take the shot were behaving patriotically. And those battles are horrific, and people lost jobs and they lost family members. I mean, everything. And then the folks who took the shot also were behaving patriotically because they thought it was their civic duty to do it. And the problem was our government misinformed us about this. And about the Brooke Jackson case. And we knew, obviously because of that, I knew very early on that there was a fraud that underlay this entire mandate. And unfortunately, the government, as in your case, has opposed Brooke Jackson's case. And those people who did the right thing have lost, some of them have really lost everything. She's been unemployed since 2020, since she reported them to the FDA. So I view our nation, though, as needing to come together. And I think your case does help us focus on some of these moral issues and the fact that it is hard to do the right thing in our country, and we need to change that.
We do. You're right. It should not be that hard. And it should be, can you say celebrated? Not really. I mean, it just should be expected for people to do the right thing and to kind of take care of your friends, your family, your patients, your clients, and just, speak the truth. So, I don't know. I mean, Werner, you and I have talked about this a few times, and what Brooke Jackson went through, and the fact that the government basically says, well, we expected there to be fraud, so it can't be against the law.
Yeah.
It's just it's absolute crazy times. It's opened my eyes up to all kinds of things that are out there that we've been lied to about. And you used the word misinformation, I think, earlier.
Yeah.
I'm not that nice. This was outright lying, and it's done to hide things. It's done to deceive, and it's done to censor people like you and me who try to do the same, do the right thing, and to minimize us, push us in a corner, push us back. I've been saying this for years. If we had 10% of the doctors out there, 10% of the nurses that would have just pushed back and said no, we wouldn't be here now. And it doesn't take much. And it's you just got to have that commitment and that resolve to kind of live by what by what your morals and values are.
Just to recap, because we came in kind of hot on this one.
We did. We didn't plan. John and I have not planned or coordinated the questioning. So, John, I'll try not to step on your questions. I know I just did. But
well, you've got to be an ostrich if you don't know who Werner is and who I am in this last.
The amazing thing is because the mainstream media does not like to cover this story because it could have put the vaccines on trial, which is something I guess they've been really avoiding
as much as possible in every case. And we can talk about that and how it affected your defense a little later. But just to recap, you provided patients an opt-out option that they were not provided by the federal government, essentially, for these vaccines. Would that be correct in saying?
Yeah, I gave my patients the option to not have the vaccine and still be able to contribute to society.
Right, because as we've learned, the vaccine is neither safe nor effective. It doesn't prevent transmission. And even the claims that say it lessens disease are actually not really holding up.
That's just moving the goalposts.
Yeah. So you gave patients essentially saline vaccines if their children. This is actually something I actually want to ask you about. So you gave children saline vaccines instead of the actual vaccines because the kids would have told on their parents. Is that how it worked?
Yeah. So when it was kind of in two stages. When it was 12 and over, and it was middle school kids. So middle school, 12 years old is 7th grade, 8th grade, and so some middle schools have 6, 7, and 8. Some only have 7 and 8. The middle school that my son was going to, as just an example, was 6, 7, and 8. So there were some kids in there that were potentially vaccinated, or they could have been vaccinated, and other kids that couldn't be. And so they were requiring masks in the middle school, because some kids were and some kids weren't vaccinated, even though you and I know masks don't mean anything. And so I was worried that some 13-year-old was going to go in and blab. No, I wasn't worried. The families were worried. Parents were worried, and we had discussions about it. Some 13-year-old would, go into school, would ask for their COVID card, or, they're out to dinner or out going to a movie, or, whatever it was where you had to kind of show your papers. The kid would go, well, here's my card, but I didn't get a shot, So I didn't want the kid to get in trouble, for that, and then, turn around and get the parents in trouble, and then, potentially get me in trouble from that side of it. So it was kind of just a, protective thing for the kids, so that they, kind of like, hey, you got a shot. You don't necessarily know what it is. There's other people that were, 16, 17 that didn't know any better, that their parents were, probably trying to hide it from them as well. And just didn't want their kids damaged, and still had, parental authority to make that decision, I guess.
A lot of people say that the parents. I'm sorry, Warner. I just get this one thing, and the parents are, might be like toothless redneck hillbillies that are the anti-vaxxers of the world. Can you describe sort of the average family that would come into you seeking this support?
Oh, it was anybody from, your, Walmart cashiers all the way up to CEOs, CFOs of companies. And it did not have a specific demographic attached to it. It was just people that were educated about themselves. I mean, I know they try to say all the Trump people were the ones that were coming in. I didn't check blue or red cards with people walking in. It was just kind of like, hey, you understand what it is. And the key thing that we made a point in the trial was, I wasn't soliciting anybody. So the prosecution was trying to say that I was keeping people from getting their vaccines. We threw out 2 million doses of vaccines in the state of Utah alone in 2023. 2 million. 300 million plus in the United States were tossed out. Okay. And they're talking about less than 2,000 vaccines on my part. Who did I keep from getting it? Okay. So, yeah.
I want to do something here, John, just for our audience. I'm not sure they know Kirk's history. And I want to just go through that a little bit with you. And then I certainly do want to get into the court and the court case as well. But, you served in the military, correct?
I did. I was a flight surgeon in the Navy.
And when was that?
94 to 97.
So, I mean, you start out, you're a patriot. You're a red-blooded American patriot going back decades at this point, correct?
Yeah, my dad was career Air Force. He was a test pilot in the Air Force.
And then you came out into your practice, and I know, I know a little bit about some of your personal struggles that you've been through, but you were also active with the state legislature and trying to fight for health freedom before this all happened. Could you talk to us about some of your efforts along those lines before this happened?
Well, yeah, when I was a political science major in college, so I have a little bit of an interest in it, so I just always pay attention to politics in general, and when I saw things getting shut down, I just knew that was not constitutional. How do they pick? They're picking winners and losers. Amazon, Home Depot, Walmart are winners, and then all the people that own your mom and pop stores, the gyms were getting shut down, everything. So I just knew that wasn't right. And they start talking about masking, and you have the mask mandates and all that. So I just started going to our state legislature and going to the state house, and just because I've got an MD after my name and everything else, I end up getting picked to make a presentation in front of these, subcommittees. And we managed to pass some laws that limited the length of time that mask mandates were allowed. It was, before we passed the law, I don't remember the number of it now, we're talking 5-6 years ago. But we passed a law that basically took the power out of the Utah Health, or the Utah, Salt Lake County Health Department, because they had the ability to mandate masks, and there was no time limit on it. And so what we said was, we passed this and said, hey, look, you got 30 days. If you want to pass a mask mandate for Salt Lake County for businesses and whatever, then you have 30 days, and then you have to present something, and the House has to pass it, the Congress has to pass it, and then it has to be signed by the governor. And so, we were, intimately involved in that. We ended up passing laws that made it a crime for businesses and schools to require vaccines, COVID vaccines, any vaccines, without giving them the option of a waiver. And in the waiver, all waivers, medical, religious, personal waivers, exemptions. So, we were very active, and as was I. I think I probably testified 4 or 5 times in various committees to try to make that happen.
Well, I just think it's fantastic, the work that you were doing even before this controversy. You were engaged with your state legislature, you were engaged with your community, and you understood that we had an unconstitutional situation on our hand in so many ways. And we saw a lot of abuses and fought these abuses here in Ohio with the county health departments. In fact, we had an early case with business shutdown. A lot of the freedom counselors represented businesses that were shut down. And I had a young lady who the school ordered her child to be quarantined. Next thing she knew, without a proper health department order, she was charged criminally for violating a quarantine. Now, we happened to get those charges, dismissed. But,
wow.
That's very scary for a young mother who really, was being abused by the public health authorities. And we had a number of those quarantine cases with children as well, and found out how really inappropriate the system was in responding to people. So let's move on to this other issue. And you just cut me off, John, if you want to. But the next thing I wanted to go to that was really interesting to me is that when you decided to help people through these mandates, it wasn't just school related. It was also, I believe, the organ transplant people. You had military people. I mean, you really had a range of people you were helping to get around these illegal mandates.
Yeah, I never asked a lot of questions, but we did get a lot of stories. We were very busy, and word got out. Like I said, we weren't advertising. We didn't put it on my website. Nobody knew that Plastic Surgery Institute of Utah was a vaccine center. Okay, but people were finding us. Originally, this started with just friends, family. Close people. I was like, hey, let's just keep it close knit. Let's just, I don't want to, I don't want to get in trouble. But then as I realized that, hey, this is just truly unconstitutional. And they are really picking winners and losers, and they are sacrificing, contributing members of society. People couldn't go to, there were IT people that never set foot in people's offices that were required to get a vaccine to sit on a computer like you and I are in a Zoom call, with each other, across the country. Or they were going to lose their job. You couldn't get on an airplane. You couldn't travel. And yes, military members getting kicked out. We've heard all about that. All of them, I don't know about all of them yet, but most of them have at least been offered a reinstatement of some sort. We have 2 military bases here in Utah. Camp Williams right across the, valley here is really close. And so I was, taking care of that. I had people that were athletes, world-class athletes that had seen some of their friends be damaged and vaccine injured, that were coming to me. But the most dramatic ones were the organ transplants. People actually physically being removed from an organ transplant list just because they weren't vaccinated. And we're talking about not just 2021, we're talking about all the way into 2022 when it should have been a known fact that these things were damaging to people and injuring people and hurting people. And they knew it. They're just kind of ignoring it. My very last patient was a kidney transplant patient. She was, she called us. We had already decided to shut down our clinic. We weren't taking any more appointments. And Chris called me and said, "Hey, we got one more. I can't turn her away." And so we didn't. So we brought her in, and she got her 2 shots, and she got her organ transplant.
Wow. That's one of the first interviews I ever did was with someone whose son was denied an inter-family organ transplant from father to son, merely
that was
because
in Ohio, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Wasn't that in Ohio?
Dane Donaldson.
Yeah. I remember that.
That was when I first realized the organ transplant issue was pretty nasty. And what's ironic is that there was the guy in Canada who was denied a transplant, and then as he was dying, or right after he died, the hospital came in and asked the wife to harvest his organs.
Oh my gosh.
Denied a transplant. Oh, but his organs are great to take.
Yeah.
He had like 5 or 6 kids too. It was a horrible story. That is tremendous. So this patient is alive now with the transplant.
Yes. Well, I assume so. I don't know.
You haven't heard otherwise.
I haven't heard otherwise.
But I think one of the things that was horrific, especially with the kidney transplants, and we dealt with multiple situations like this, but the vaccine itself can really do harm to kidneys. And, you're asking somebody to, go through this process, and then you're injecting something that can really damage those kidneys in the future. So it was just so crazy. I will say most of the organ transplant people that we dealt with managed to get the transplant somewhere. But if they were just absolutely refusing to take the vaccine, they had to go to another location, some other hospital. Cleveland, I think the Donaldsons were a Cleveland Clinic transplant, and just unbelievable. The Cleveland Clinic has been on the forefront in some ways of showing how ineffective the shots are with their own population, that the more you take, the more likely you are to get COVID. So it's really a lot of contradictory information and contradictory behavior by the Cleveland Clinic there.
Yeah, the Cleveland Clinic was one of the first published that first study of 50,000 of their employees that showed that they had a 2 to 3% or 2 to 3 time increased risk of actually just getting sick from COVID. That's the only measure that they published. And they still tried to undermine that, and the mainstream media still tried to say, well, that's not exactly what it said. So yeah, it's crazy to go back and look at what the narratives were back then.
John, I'd like to get on with the charges that he faced here.
Please do. Yeah.
You face charges of fraud, counterfeiting government documents, destruction of government property, and I want to particularly talk about the destruction of government property. We have looked at the statements of work and the contracting with the DOD. And one of the things that I noticed very early on is that the DOD claimed ownership of the vial up until it was injected in a human being. So this was never a public health issue. This was always a national defense controlled issue, DOD controlled issue. I think, Dr. Moore, you've pointed out in the past that, it's the federal government that developed this product and then used Pfizer and Moderna almost as covers to get the thing out into the marketplace as if it were a true pharmaceutical. And I think it is actually not that at all. The first thing, it's not a vaccine. And I think we still, and within Freedom Council, we're discussing how we can challenge that, go back kind of to the beginnings and challenge the definition of vaccines. And then the second thing that's important is that this was a countermeasure to a biological attack. The entire rationale for the contracting with Pfizer was that we had to maintain military readiness in the face of a biological attack. Now, none of that was made clear to anyone as this thing came in under the Trojan horse of the word vaccine and the Trojan horse name of Pfizer, Moderna, J&J, and AstraZeneca, and others. So I have I know why they claimed it was government property, because they claimed it as government property up until the injection. And that's part of the rationale that I saw behind the charge. But I don't think the public understands that very well. I'd like your input. And did I get all those charges right?
Yeah, so it was fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, because there's more than one person, as you know. It was counterfeiting, and then they added that fourth charge, to me at least, which was destruction of government property in January of 25. Again, I've always made the claim, one, there were no laws. I didn't break any laws. So they're trying to shoehorn me into a fraud charge because I was doing something that they didn't want me to do. Fraud has to have victims, and who are the victims? There weren't any. So that was one of our arguments to some degree. The main argument, though, that we had was along that, did the government own the property? And I've used this analogy a number of times in my discussions about this. We were trying to show that even though the federal government bought the product from a pharmaceutical company, and then the pharmaceutical company would then ship it to me, to my office, and once it arrived to my office, the government was then trying to say that they still owned it. Well, in that shipment process, one, they would never show us those contracts. They tried to present redacted contracts between the federal government, the DOD, and Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J. And they wouldn't present them. They even brought Gary Disbrow from Washington, D.C., the head of BARDA, to testify against me, but they wouldn't give him the contracts that he supposedly negotiated to be able to determine the costs. And the reason is because those contracts were unredacted for our attorneys to see, but BARDA and ASPR and the DOD never gave them permission to actually make those public. Because once you have to present them to a witness and or a jury, they're now public record. And so they were not willing to do that. And so they got Gary Disbrow up there to just kind of say, well, yeah, I mean, I negotiated contracts, but and they were worth more than $1 each, because we were trying to get them to say the only document they presented was a health department document that showed that the product was worth a penny. And what they tried to argue was, well, that's the only, because the column there in the Excel spreadsheet, we couldn't put in a zero. We had to put in a value. So I was just like, well, if you're going to put in a value, why don't you put in the real value? $6.78, whatever. But they put in a penny. So at the end, 1,937 doses of vaccines, or 2,260, depending on what numbers you wanted to talk about, was only $22.60. Okay, so they couldn't meet the threshold that this was even a felony charge. But we really challenged hard on the ownership issue, because once the DOD paid Big Pharma for the product was then given to McKesson, and there was another contract with McKesson. And when the product was given to McKesson, as an example, they were the ones that were liable for it. And if they had a truck that burned up, and this is the exact example that my attorney used, if you have a truck that blows up on the way to its delivery and all of your product is in there, who's responsible for it? And, Chris Duggar from the CDC was in there, and he said, well, it would be up to the insurance company for McKesson, so then they've already abdicated and given up ownership at that point. So then by the time it shows up at my door, it's already changed hands twice. There's no way that then they can turn back around and say, well, that they still own it. So that was the first step. The second step was they were trying to say that I had destroyed government property. Well, in the actual CDC agreement that I had, I was actually permitted to destroy any product that had expired. And so every single one of our doses and every single one of our vials, even by their own witness, which was my ex-office manager who turned on us, even she told them that all of them were expired when we got rid of them. So we never destroyed any government property. All of it was expired, and by contract, we were required to destroy it. So it was, we at the end of the week, I was telling everybody on Friday afternoon, we had a really good week. We had 3 days of testimony. We had 2 days of jury selection, 3 days of testimony. And at the end of the week, I'm just sitting here. We had a little meeting at the end of the day on Friday, and I was just like, Kathy, they haven't met the threshold here. They can't prove that they've had it. They can't prove that it's worth more than $1,000. I mean, what am I missing? I woke up at 4:00 in the morning on Saturday, and I'm just still thinking the same thing. I'm like, God, I'm a smart guy. Okay, I've got an education. I know how to read. But what am I missing here? It's just, it can't be that simple. And then 8:30 in the morning on Saturday, I get that phone call from my attorneys that the case is dismissed. I asked one of the people that was there, that was on the other side, that was actually friends with one of the other people that was going to come in and testify against us, the people that own the donation place, the Health Independence Alliance that I was having people donate to, or asking people to donate to. They were in there watching because the actual witnesses couldn't be there. And I asked them the same thing. They came to our celebration party because they're still friends of mine. And I asked them, I said, hey, am I missing anything here? What was your impression at the end of the week? And I didn't tell them this, I just told you what my thoughts were. I didn't tell them what my thoughts were. I just said, hey, tell me what your thoughts were at the end of the week. And they said the exact same thing. They said, we just don't think that the government has proved their point. We don't think that they've proven that it was worth that much. And we certainly don't think that they proved that they still owned it when it got delivered to your door.
Hey, I'm very interested, the start of the trial and the voir dire, that's the jury selection part of this. That must have been extremely interesting in terms of the responses you were getting from the jury pool.
Yeah. We had 2 questionnaires. We had a single, one questionnaire was more generic in general that went out to them. And then once they showed up in 2 groups of about 65, one on Monday, one on Tuesday. Mm-hmm. And then there's a supplemental questionnaire that asked them more questions, more related to COVID, because now it's kind of like we just wanted to get some ideas. It was kind of anybody that answered yes on the COVID question, that they either had a problem with it or didn't have a problem with it, were the ones that we interviewed. Because if everybody else just said no through the 4 questions that were on there, then we were going based upon some of the other stuff. It was really interesting. The really strong supporters that we had, or people, there was one guy that we had to get rid of just because he was way too biased. He's a farmer from somewhere out in rural Utah, who just kind of said everything that we're saying right here, right now. This was not a vaccine. I didn't want it. I don't know why. And so it's just I wasn't looking at him and trying to change his testimony or anything, but I was just kind of like, dude, you got to keep quiet. Just shut up.
Well, I just ended a trial. I was in the Shara trial for 3 weeks. I don't know if you know that. You've been very busy. But the same thing happened in our jury panel, is that, anyone who was favorable to our position got knocked off because they were so strong that most of them were knocked off for cause. And that really changes the jury pool. And in fact, I'd argue you don't really get a jury of your peers, because that entire group of people is excluded. And we've seen this in other trials where the people who refuse to get a vaccination are not allowed on the jury. Right. That's happened in some of the employment trials. So it's a stunning, it's really a stunning indictment of our system when judges are discarding everyone who didn't get a vaccine, a quote unquote vaccine, or has those views, and you're really missing out on that jury that reflects the communities that we live in, because a significant number of people did not take it and are now opposed to it, even if they did take it.
Well, we had an advantage. We had 2 defendants plus my business. And so the judge gave 7 peremptory challenges
Nice.
to each party. So we had in total 16 to their 7. So, and then, anybody that got eliminated for cause regardless. But, we had, we got 16. I'll tell you that right at the end, when the judge announced who the jurors were, we didn't interview everybody. Okay. We had 140 people. We got to about, 65. We got to about 80, and we only interviewed about, I think number 71 or 72 was the last one that we interviewed. And there was a lady, at number 49. And she was so bland. We really liked her. She was a definite yes on our scale. We had questions about where you get your news. And so it was just kind of like all the people that said that they got their news from like alternative media sites or had, X accounts, whatever, and were conservative and made a comment about, what they liked, maybe, in terms of their political leanings, those kinds of things, spontaneous statements that they would make, not necessarily things that we asked of them. But this one lady, she's number 49, and everybody around her had been interviewed. And so she stands up and she goes, "Well, why was everybody interviewed and not me?" and she was on the panel. And it was kind of cute, because it's just like, well, we wanted her, and the prosecution couldn't find anything to interview her over. And so they couldn't get rid of her. So she was definitely, a really strong, and I'd really be interested to know what the jury, what they were leaning to on, Friday afternoon. Obviously they're not, it's Monday today. They've already been notified that they don't have to come back. So, but I'd really be interested to find out, what they were thinking at the end of Friday.
The other thing about a trial, and I've heard you talk about this, is that the judges really limit what's coming into trial. And in your case, and I'm going to just generalize, with whistleblowers that we've worked with in federal court who come under criminal review and criminal indictment, the judges are really loath to allow something called the necessity defense. And then the other issue I'd like you to address that necessity defense and how you dealt with that. And then the other one was, what limitations did the judge set in terms of COVID, in terms of the dangers of the shot, and I understand even the lot that you had access to actually resulted in some deaths in other locations. So could you address those issues?
Yeah, well, so the judge disallowed a necessity defense all the way back in October of last year, and we fought it, but he just wouldn't let it in, and so we weren't allowed to bring in any witnesses that. The funny thing is, right, they're trying to prove fraud with no victims. They're not interviewing any of my patients to have them come in and testify against me. And then they're not going to allow me to bring in any witnesses to kind of support my stance in terms of, hey, this is a bad product. It's not a vaccine. We shouldn't be calling it a vaccine. The patents themselves call them gene therapy, interventions, not vaccines. But we weren't allowed to bring in any of that in. And so it was kind of worrisome initially for me. I was like, well, gosh darn it. Just like you said about the system, jury of your peers, when they eliminate all the people that believe that, that believe along your lines. How can we get a fair trial here? Anyway, so we were able to kind of get in and, get past that a little bit. And then, like I said, the ownership issue became our thing. CDC, federal government's trying to claim that they own this product when they actually, even if they bought it from Pfizer and even if they gave it to McKesson, they then gave the Utah Health Department full license to give it to anybody that they wanted. Even the CDC agreement that I signed never went back to the CDC. The CDC did not know my name. CDC did not have, did not know that the Utah Health Department had approved me as a vaccine provider. I never ordered anything from the CDC. I ordered it all through the Utah Health Department. The Utah Health Department would then provide an order to the CDC, and then they would come back around and say, okay, well, you guys have 2 million doses that are allocated. He wants, 100 of them. Here they are. And you already have them stored in the state of Utah. They're going to be delivered by a contracted employee, contracted individual or company, and they're responsible for it if something happens. So it was just, so we ended up having I don't know that we necessarily changed it, because that's Kathy, my attorney originally, that was her, her line of defense from the get-go. I really wanted to hammer on the vaccine. If they're going to hold me to an agreement that says that I have to vaccinate people with a product that they're giving me according to their instructions, then I wanted to hammer on them that, well, you guys never gave me a vaccine. I was just like, this, you're holding me, you're saying, hey, I'm going to give you this vaccine and you need to inject it into these people. And I'm saying, okay, well, you give me a vaccine and I'll inject it.
Yeah.
And I was just like, this wasn't a vaccine.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we need to cycle back around to the beginning and the definition of vaccines, and we're going to do that as well. Your co-defendant, I know your co-defendant has not been as public, I think, as you. Is there anything that you would want to say about your co-defendant right now, or is your co-defendant trying to stay private?
No, Chris. Chris Anderson has been she's been a rock through this whole process. She used to drive by my house when we had pretrial restrictions where we couldn't talk to each other, and toss a bag of lettuce over that would have some notes in it and saying, hey, this is what I looked up. Here's a copy of an article that I got. It wasn't anything about testimony. It was just about, hey, here's an article in case you haven't seen it. And I'd probably seen most of them, but it was just kind of cute of her to just come by and do that, and everything else.
And you got in trouble with some communications on Signal. I know that led to 22 days in basically
22 days in jail. Yeah. So I sent on Signal, for whatever reason. I don't know why I didn't do text message. I wasn't trying to hide anything. I mean, it's, I just sent him a text message to two of my co-defendants, and I just said, hey, we got court tomorrow. You should make sure, because Chris's attorney he was really hard to get a hold of, and Chris was really having a hard time communicating with him, and he wasn't letting her know about these little hearings that we were having. And this was a pretty big hearing, and so I didn't know whether she knew about it. And so I just sent a text message, said, hey, we have court tomorrow. Make sure that you and your attorneys are there. And then my other co-defendant, the other one that I sent that to, actually turned that into the prosecution, and the prosecution said, well, that's a violation of your pretrial restrictions because you're talking about the case. And so they put me in jail for 22 days. They put Chris and I in jail for 22 days. Well, Chris got out in 2. But they kept me there. So there goes your slanted position.
Warner, is that normal for co-defendants to be prohibited from communication?
When you have kind of a joint defense here, so you ought to be able to work together to put on your defense. I mean, we actually are engaged in that. There's some caveats and careful things you need to do as an attorney and a client, but I mean, certainly you have joint issues on defense that you've got to communicate with each other.
What also protects you, right? You have a joint defense agreement. And then that way, if you do talk about something with one of your other co-defendants and then they turn on you, they can't bring that up.
Right. And that's the risk, is that each defendant has a little bit of a different interest. And that does frequently happen, where a co-defendant will go ahead and take the plea, but in exchange for the plea, then they're going to testify against the remaining defendants. And that's happened in your case, I take it.
Yeah, it happened, which is really the irony out of all of this, right? The two of my co-defendants, one she got caught with some marijuana paraphernalia in her apartment. They came and searched it. And then they had her do a diversion agreement because she wanted to go to nursing school, and I was fully supportive of her doing that. So she wanted to go to nursing school, so she needed to, keep her record clean. So they kind of, managed to put her through this diversion program. What was interesting, on the day that she did her diversion program was the day that she signed her contract was also the day that she did a urine test. And 4 days later, her urine test failed for opiates. And they still allowed her to have the diversion. So my defense counsel brought that up to him and said, look, you did this. And, so she brought up the fact that there was another doctor that also signed on to the agreement, and he's not over there sitting next to me. It was just me. They're not over there sitting next to her. And there was another employee of mine that was never charged either. She was actually just brought in. She was going to be brought in as a straight witness, no plea deal, no nothing. They just, even though she was just as much as involved with, with everything as Carrie and Sandra were and everything else, they weren't prosecuting her. So
yeah, you have such a generous personality. I guess I'm wondering what you're thinking about the people who testified against you or brought in to testify against you, and whether you understand their position, forgive their position, what your stance is on that.
Well, I do forgive their position. I do forgive them. Their position is completely different. Sandra did this purely for herself. And look, there was, John Warner, there was nothing that they were going to be able to say that I wasn't willing to say for myself. And there was nothing no evidence that they were going to bring in. I have a little bit of animosity with Carrie because she did lie. She lied on the stand. She actually stamped the agreement. The agreement that we had, there were two sections there to sign it. One is the general, or is the chief medical officer. The other one was the chief executive officer. And you could definitely see the stark difference. The name, the printed name, the date of the signature, first and last name, date of the signature were in her writing. And then the signature line was a stamped signature of mine that she was the only person that had. And so she told the jury that, that was not a stamped signature, or she didn't know if she had stamped it or I had stamped it. So if it was a stamped signature, I could have very well done that. Well, why would I have a stamp of my own signature in my office? I don't keep it there. Why would I walk down the hall, pull the stamp of hers out and, stamp the contract when I could have just done it myself? But the name, date, and the first name, last name, and date was in her writing, and then it was a stamped signature. And then in Dr. Kelly's, it was, his first name, his last name, and date were all in his writing with his signature. So, I mean, when you lie about it, and you're trying to screw somebody over, I'll take exception to that. So.
Yeah. There's so many ironies here. I mean, from the fact that Pfizer, committed fraud in the clinical trials and obviously our allegations in the complaint, and those frauds, what did Moderna do in its trials, J&J, all the trials are very problematic in terms of the data and data analysis. So the very beginning of this is fraudulent. And then all the way through to the vaccine injured, the failure to report vaccine injuries, which occurred in the lot you used as well, that you didn't use, I'm sorry, but that the other hospitals did use, that's a crime under federal law. It says so in the vaccination provider agreement that the failure to report those injuries is a crime. So, and no one has been prosecuted for that.
Right. Yeah, selective prosecution, and then they turn that around, and there's a PA in New York State that actually got fired because she was filling out,
I happen to represent her.
Oh yeah, and she was filling them out, and she got fired because she ended up landing in a better job, I guess. I mean, she's super happy.
I can update you on that. Actually, we ended up filing a Federal False Claims Act case, a fraud case against the hospital for failing to make those reports as necessary. And we have some good news. In June, the judge ruled in our favor that we can proceed with that case because we were facing a motion to dismiss, by Rochester Regional, and he gave us a narrow window, but it's enough for us to get discovery, find out all the people they vaccinated, and also how many injuries came.
Wow, really?
Yes.
You're going to get all that. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's the key to the case.
Oh my gosh, that's absolutely key.
Yeah, the judge said, we wanted them to be held liable for anyone who came in with an injury. The judge narrowed it. He said the hospital has to have given them the shot and they have to be hospitalized after the shot. And we think we have a couple thousand people who got the shot in Rochester Regional Hospital that then came back for services at the hospital and stayed a night at least.
Yeah.
And there are deaths in there, myocarditis. You can imagine. You know all the details.
Right. Dr. Moore, am I recalling this correctly? Did you guys discover that there was a hot batch that was part of what you were administering that killed 34 people? Is that correct?
So that actually just came out, I think, just last week, where somebody was posting online. I don't remember if it was Julie Butte or somebody else on X, I think, posted something. Yeah, very strong that there were 34 deaths in that lot alone reported. So if you only have like a 1% reporting rate, that's, that's 3,400 people just from that lot alone that could have potentially died.
And so that means that some of your patients were likely spared a very disastrous consequence of those shots if you'd administered it.
Oh, absolutely. I anywhere from at 2,000 doses. If you look at some of the numbers, I think that Denis Rancourt put out and some other people, 1 in 800 were deaths. So that's 2.5 people, 3 people alone. Yeah. And that's just a very small number. And all the way up to depending on lots. I mean, there was that Danish study that came out that showed that there were 3 different sets. There was like 95% of their complications came from one lot number or one series of lot numbers, and then 80% came 95% came from that, and then the other vaccines, there was one that had a few complications. Then there was one that was basically saline. It was just like there were no complications. And there's a lot of one of the contracts that I got from a lady by the name of Destiny online showed that the second largest purchase that the government made was for sterile saline shots. So why are they buying sterile saline shots?
Oh, I'd love to see that.
I'll see if I can find it and get it to you. Yeah.
Wow.
That's not conspicuous at all.
Yeah.
What do you think, being as you were in the courtroom and you were, very probably aware of everything going on, what do you think was the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of Bondi and her decision to dismiss?
Oh boy, that's total speculation on my part. I think the political climate this last week with the Epstein fiasco, if you ask me about it, how is it that you have a mountain of data on your desk and then there's all of a sudden there's nothing that shows up, and and the whole Bongino Cash Patel kind of conflict and everything that's going on there. But I think that I'd like to think that we as a people were able to do something, and with the rallies that we had last week, with the articles that were written, with the posts and the reposts and the videos, my videos, the videos of the people that were speaking at this rally. My son's video has over 2 million views, and then you start getting some politicians involved with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massey, Mike Lee here in Utah, who all obviously know her. RFK posted a couple of months ago that I deserved a medal on his personal account. It never went anywhere from his personal off his personal account into the Secretary of HHS account, but I knew he knew about the case. And so I just think, and we live in a world of 6 degrees of separation. You know that, John, that, Warner. And so there's people that know people that know people that know people. My sister lives in Connecticut. She's a general contractor, and she's building a house for a guy who is best friends with one of RFK's godparents. Okay, one of his kids' godparents, right? So they were like, "Oh, let me help," and so they were. So you just have all kinds of things that were going around. I got to know Douglas Mackey, and so he, with all of his trials and tribulations with what he was going through. I mean, his court case just got tossed on got reversed on appeal. So he's free, but he knew Ed Martin just through his contacts, and so I think that just everybody speaking about it and knowing and kind of just little birdie here, a little birdie there. I think that it just finally came to the point where, hey, look, there's enough public outrage and public support behind what they're doing to Dr. Moore that I think we have the ability to make a difference here.
Do you feel vindicated? I mean, obviously, a not guilty verdict would be more vindication. I mean, it's, in my opinion, this is a win for you just because your life is back and now you're in control. But for us as a society, we haven't fixed the legal system that created this disaster in the first place. It can happen again. It's just like a snake that bit you and now crawls back under the bush to avoid getting its head chopped off. Do you feel that way?
I mean, there was a post on, I just did a podcast with one of my really good friends, Doc Malik, yesterday. And he brought that up. He said one of the comments in his thread was like, well, you really can't say that he won because he was getting beat up and he's down and he's getting his butt kicked and, you know, he can't get up and everything else. And then all of a sudden somebody just pulls the attacker off of him and now they say, well, he won. So I don't know. I don't look at it that way necessarily. I do agree with you. A not guilty verdict would have been, you know, the kind of the cherry on top. But just the fact that they felt like they needed to dismiss this, knowing what we know, what I know, what you know, I don't care what other people think. I know that I didn't do anything wrong. I know that I didn't violate any laws. We talked about that. There are no laws. And, you know, you could make an argument that I fraudulently gave somebody a medical record that said that they had something done that they didn't get done. But I don't know what they're going to use it for. And most of them, I didn't have any clue. They're just, they're coming in, they have full informed consent. They know exactly what it is that they're getting. Nobody was deceived. And they got what they wanted.
And it begs a question, doesn't it? My health information, my medical records should be mine. The government has no business knowing what treatments I'm taking, what vaccinations I'm taking. Neither does my employer. And, they have tried to suck the adults now into the mandates so that there's an adult vaccination schedule. And all that I've been reading, and I've learned a lot about vaccines. I was always kind of an anti-vaxxer, I will say that. But, I've really looked at it much more deeply because of the societal implications of this. And they are very, very dangerous. When you inject a coronavirus, spike protein, and you bypass the mucosal immunity system, you're doing something very different. And in fact, that spike protein has no brakes. And then you start looking at the other vaccines, and like there's a great book called Turtles All the Way Down.
Oh, awesome.
About it. But, and there's many other great books, and I wish I had some of them right now. Injecting vaccines is very, very problematic, and it should be extremely, well tested. And right now, I'm going to tell you something that I find very amazing. Is they're testing mRNA vaccines, about 100 of them right now, it's quote unquote vaccines. They're testing them with people who've already had the COVID shot.
Oh my gosh.
Now wait a minute, what is that going to do?
Yeah.
And is that data at all reliable, or is that turtles all the way down? And I think it is turtles all the way down. So,
well, one of our NIH Gate reporting stories that I've been covering is that the National Cancer Institute and NIH knew that spike protein was going to cause P53 suppression, which would increase cancers. And I did FOIA requests to the NIH to show that they knew about it, and they blocked 490 pages of communications on this. And you can learn about it at NIHgate.com. But there was evidence all the way back in August of 2021 that there was going to be a cancer component to this. And
yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, the risk that you've spared your patients from is massive.
Massive.
And I find it interesting. You mentioned Gary Disbrow from BARDA. His predecessor was Rick Bright, who was the one that decided that tonic water was deadly and wanted to alert the American people to that. Right. Especially because it scored political points against Donald Trump in May of 2020. But BARDA is a very curious organization within the federal government. They had a situation where BARDA was used to launder money throughout the government to buy new furniture and things like that. They called it the Bank of BARDA within HHS and ASPR, I think.
Yeah,
they
Asper is their parent company, right?
Yeah, they collaborate with Bio, the pharmaceutical lobbyist that was recently outed for quite a few nefarious things, but also was sponsoring the censorship groups online, which we've covered in shotsgate.com. We just got so many gates, we're running out of URLs for them. But, you know,
right.
It's
And one of the first ones that we know about was actually fake.
Right. But my point, I guess, is that they brought in Disbrow, who was the head of an agency. They brought in the guy that helped create the protocol into Grace Shara's case.
Yeah.
These flash in the pan cases like yours, which not really flash in the pan, but they're isolated, they're unique. They are bringing out the biggest guns they can to shut these cases down and almost, I guess, intimidate jurors with an appeal to authority. What do you think about that?
Well, and at the same time, by limiting what it is that we can talk about. Right. So they bring these experts in that, and this is an issue with our society right now is that, it's kind of rely on the experts. Fauci's the expert. Francis Collins is the expert. I graduated medical school in 1993. I started my practice in 2001. I had never been to the CDC website until these last 3 or 4 years, 5 years, ever. I'd never looked to any experts to give me any insight on anything. If I'm looking at any experts, I might be reading some journals. And then you go back now and you look at, Marsha Angel and, some of these other editors in chief of some of these major journals are coming out and saying that at least half of the information that has been published in our journals is fake. So now you're just kind of like, you have this perception. You used to have this perception of things and how well things were running and the information that you're getting is true and everything else. But, how much of it's really fake? All these studies, the Brooke Jackson case, that is just a travesty. The fraud that's going on behind the scenes. When you put the pharmaceutical company in charge of running their own studies and paying their, it's kind of like the government paying a public defendant, to defend the criminal that they're trying to put in jail, right? So the salaries are all coming from the same place. So there's a huge conflict there that's across our whole system. Look, one of the stipulations, I wish I could remember the actual thing, and maybe Warner, this, but our Constitution gives us the right to reset our government. If we want to, we have the option to disband our government and start all over again. I think we're getting close to that point.
Well, yeah, I don't know how we come back from this. It's, people are like, oh, we've got to work on the election situation. Okay, yes, that's one area. But then you have a major problem with the judiciary. Then you have the entrenched, I don't know what you want to call it, of the deep state, the federal government, which is massive and unpenetrable. We can't, the purpose of Epidemic of Fraud was not just to, remind everybody of this terror that we went through, but also to expose the actual deep state players within the organizations that were making these bad calls, like Janet Woodcock, like Rick Bright, like Gary Disbrow. This was something that hasn't really been done before. And it's done a little bit, but not not to that level. And I deal with so many people in various situations that have been overlooked and targeted by the government. To that point, you mentioned that you were very active politically, I guess, or publicly into how the state of Utah was handling the lockdowns and whatnot. Do you think that you got scrutiny because of the work that you had been doing outside of this vaccine?
You know what? That's a very good question, John. I don't know. Could very well be. I think we're all being followed and we're all being tracked and everything anyway, but it could very well be. And I've also been told that now that I've quote unquote beaten the federal government, watch my ass because they're going to be coming after me for something else.
And that leads me to something. And you do not have to talk about this. I'll preface it with that. But I wondered if you could you talk about any terms of the dismissal? And if you cannot, please don't.
I don't know that I'm restricted on speaking about that. I guess there's something called, is it a Hyde Amendment or a Hyde, like something about Hyde that, it requires that you don't try to seek reimbursement for attorney's fees.
Right.
And so I was asked to waive that. My attorneys recommended that I do, just so that I could get out from under this. I don't know. I haven't personally signed anything, so I don't know if my attorneys have signed anything on my behalf regarding that. Because I've had a lot of people say, no, you don't need to sign it. What is Pam Bondi going to do? Go back on her, public dismissal on your case? So I don't know.
And you had tremendous costs in defending yourself. I mean, it was almost $1 million, right?
Yeah.
And how are you? I mean, what can we do to help you now? What do you need now?
I don't know. I need to get back on my feet. I need to figure out whether I still want to practice medicine and how much I do. I do. I mean, I have to do something to make money because I'm broke. So if, people are willing to still donate to my legal defense fund, that's not, that's now defunct. I mean, I still owe my attorneys money. Don't get me wrong. It's not like it's all.
Well, I think that's a legitimate request. To where would they, if they were to want to donate to your legal defense fund, where would they do that?
So I have a Give Send Go, and it's Give Send Go /Fight for More with the number 4. Give Send Go /Fight for More. I think, this last week has been our best week. We collected 20 some odd thousand, 30,000, I think maybe in a couple of weeks. So it's really helped us, but we're still only at about 150 grand, and
Yeah.
I've spent almost 800.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, there you go. John got that typed in there quickly.
Quick. And that question that
Magic
you had
fingers.
Earlier on the screen, I think I saw that come up on the right.
Can you still
have a
practice?
license. I have a state license. The federal government can't go after it. I mean, if I get indicted or if I get convicted on something, then the state can come after me. But yeah, I'm still practicing. I'm in a suburb of Salt Lake City, and my website is, I think it's still Plastic Surgery Institute of Utah. So, or Plastic Surgery Institute Utah is what my website is. So.
I'm getting messages like, tell Kirk's attorney in writing not to sign the Hyde Amendment.
I know. I've had both people from all extremes. I've had text messages from people, don't you dare sign that. Oh, dude, you better sign it because you just want this thing to go away. I mean, it's just, whatever. So
speaking to the human side of this, what do you feel like today? I mean, I'm sure it's a relief, but this has got to be, I don't know. You almost have to have PTSD after this.
If you'd have asked me this a week ago, what would have things been like if your case gets dismissed? I would have said, oh my gosh, that would be the best possible thing that can happen. I would be so elated. I'd be over the moon. You name it, any phrase that's out there, cloud nine, all that. And yes, it's given me a lot of relief. And I'm certainly happy about it, but I think I'm more exhausted now than what I was, last week. It's kind of even though the weight has been lifted off of me, and from the standpoint of the prosecution and worried about going to jail and, those kinds of things, I still haven't been able to sleep. I'm up early. I went to bed. I never go to bed with any icons on my phone that are still unopened. And I couldn't do it anymore. And on Saturday night, I think I went to bed. I had 178 text messages that hadn't been answered yet, with 450 some odd emails. So I wake up at 4:00 in the morning and start going through them. And then by the time I got done going through those 178 messages, I had 120 more. And so I'm answering text messages to some people. I mean, it was 3:30 in the morning here, so I'm sure there were some people in California that were getting a text tone or a vibration on their phone at 2:30 in the morning. But I was just like, I got to get through these. But I'm actually more exhausted now than I think I've been in a while, and I just think it's that emotional letdown. So
I think you would be an excellent candidate for Senate. I think you've been through it, but it's the people who have been victimized by the government that are the ones that need to go into it to fix it. And I would definitely nominate you, sir, for Senate.
Well, it's really interesting. I had a lot of people say that to us on Saturday. My girlfriend, fiance said, "No way, we're not doing that." My mom actually was the one that was kind of like, "Well, you'd actually be really good at it, Kirk." So I can't say that I haven't thought about it. It's certainly something that's out there, but it's not something that's kind of on the, in the near future for me.
Well, you've been baptized by fire for sure.
Yeah, and I think you have a very powerful platform, to talk about what kind of changes we need to see, going forward. And I mean, obviously, how our system is being run with these protocols and these supposed guidances that you've talked about coming down from the CDC and our national government that are not laws. But yet, because they're paying all the Medicaid and Medicare money, they coerce the hospitals and the medical profession to go along with really stupid stuff that's killing people. And, so I think you have a very powerful voice to do that. And then, and we do need to restructure. I mean, obviously, we have a lot of people who are looking at almost parallel systems. And even within the system that we have, we need to push this out of the national level back down to local levels and local decision making, I think. And I don't know, you really have a role that I think you've been a powerful voice. You've cared about this pre-pandemic even. So, I really appreciate all that you've done, and I think you're going to have an incredible role here going forward in the future.
Well, I appreciate that, Warner. Thank you. And John, I appreciate that too.
I agree wholeheartedly. Well, we don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm sure you have some beach that you want to stick your feet into.
Yeah, I think my phone's probably gone off another 57 times. So,
well, Dr. Moore, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, look, I just think one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever gotten from anybody was my mentor in general surgery when I was still in medical school. And he gave me two bits of advice, one which doesn't apply here. It's kind of go to a program where you want to live. And then the second bit of advice is that only you look out for you. So, I just think people need to realize that the federal government's not there to, look after your own best interests. And I think once we realize that, we can affect a lot of change.
Agreed. Dr. Kirk Moore, recently dismissed from charges. Congratulations. Thank you so much for being on Broken Truth.
Yeah, honestly, we are very honored that you gave us the opportunity to have this discussion with you, because I know, you've got requests, obviously hundreds of requests for interviews, and we're very honored that you graced us today with your presence. So thank you.
Well, Warner, I've met you before. You helped us out just with a little bit of strategy and talking us through some things. Now, John, you've reached out to me a couple of times. We weren't able to kind of make things happen. So I'm a loyal person, and when I can talk to people that I already kind of know a little bit, it's always a little more comfortable.
Well, I was probably calling about some plastic surgery augmentation, but we can talk about that later.
I don't do boobs on guys. Sorry.
I wasn't talking about boobs, but anyway, thanks a lot, guys. Have a great day, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
I knew as early as February 2020 that I needed to do something.
I recognized that there was a systematic problem and that this was not about hydroxychloroquine, it was something larger.
Fear shut the world down, and people made a lot of money at it as they were killing us.
I was asked to speak at a freedom rally that was set up to discredit my reputation.
Whoever orchestrated this must not have the safety of this nation in mind.
Medicine and politics should be separated. These doctors were handcuffed.
The American public has awakened. We have a new civil rights movement to restore our rights, and we're going to hold them accountable.
It is a natural progression of a man of God or woman of character to see injustice, to seek it out, and then to act upon it.
you hear me? We will never lock down again. This is the hill we die on.
Don't miss New American Heroes with attorney Warner Mendenhall and John Davidson, Mondays on brokentruth.tv. Presented by Freedom Council. Join today at freedomcouncil.org.
The FDA makes a decision which is sometimes totally independent of any finding by the advisory committee.
The agencies turned a blind eye toward simple, cheap, possibly effective treatments that, by the way, created no harm.
They're really criticizing science because I represent science.
Interference in research happened.
Trying to manage the research community, many people have concluded is really like herding cats, and it is like herding cats, but guess what? I've got a big bag of cat food. It's called the NIH budget.
Was it because the president was encouraged by the use of this drug that you became discouraged by it?
And nothing to do with politics, sir.
They're not doing it because they say they don't want to do it. They're Republicans, they don't like to be told what to do. Right. And we got to break that, unpack that.
You are implying that what we did was responsible for the deaths of individuals. I totally resent that. And if anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you.
If 2 years from now we have the studies and we say, hey, that stuff really would have worked, and the government stopped that from being used, if I was a family of a person that was stopped from getting chloroquine, I'd be pretty mad.
Freedom Council is nothing without all of you. How do we go about getting people held criminally responsible for their acts? The military is still at risk. Election interference, the medicalization of childhood. These drug dealers like Pfizer and Moderna, we can seize their property. We develop our litigation through conferences like this. It's going to come through communications. It's going to come through conversations. And Freedom Council is that conversation.
For information, visit freedomcouncil.org.
Many doctors are actually working in employed positions, and they were told, if you use these drugs, you probably will be fired.
This is something that could have ended the pandemic if people had understood it, and instead it's being suppressed.
And such a violation, I have to stress, has never occurred before for any medication ever.
The federal government is incentivizing hospitals to prescribe a medication which is toxic.
This is a study designed by the World Health Organization that is not only designed to fail, it's designed to kill.
Guess what they did? They gave her a 5-day cycle, and my mom is dead.
Is this about money? Because if it's about money, then it's disgusting that we killed a person for the price of a stock.
Academic medicine is committing fraud, is committing, I think, a crime against humanity.
And if you ask me, this isn't a hospital, this is a concentration camp.
I've interviewed doctors, nurses, vaccine-injured, malpractice survivors, and even interacted with heads of the FDA. And my work has been repeatedly censored. What I've found is an unholy alliance of public, private, and political groups that seem hell-bent on turning all of us into lab rats.
There's something that has gone wrong here.
History is unforgiving. It will become very clear very soon who was on the right side of history, who was on the wrong side of history.
My name is John, and I am a storyteller. And this is kind of my story.